So, hi again, everybody. This is the a re-recording of the skeletal system drawing slash lecture that we did yesterday. I meant to record it and I forgot to record it during class, so I thought I would go back and just record it. Um, we're going to start just like we did yesterday. Just put a few guidelines down. I'm going to drop a center line down. Pardon me. Um, and where we're going from here, we're going to take this, whatever space you have, and just divide it in half, approximately. It's pretty close, I think. Okay, we'll call that half right there. Quit messing with it. And then the top part of that, we're going to divide into thirds plus. So we're going to go off of a typical 7 heads tall figure. So we've got about 3.5 heads up here, and we would have 3.5 heads on the bottom, but the bottom we're just going to divide in half also. So this should give us a pretty good setup for our figure to draw on top of. I'm going to lock that layer and we'll put a new one on top of it so we can get the guides out of there at the end. And to get this figure started, let's just start with the skull. And you can start with just a circle. Once I get that down, I like to turn on the symmetry tool in Photoshop, or in Sketchbook has a nice one. I know a lot of other programs do too. It's cool. It's just fast. It cuts your drawing time in half, like kind of literally. Um, so and we'll put the chin on. We'll get the skull kind of sketched in here. Oopsie. Let me erase some of that. Come about halfway down to the skull, and this is going to be our brow ridge. The eyes will be right under there. And then the remaining space, let's divide that about in thirds, and then you'll get about the height of the nose and the mouth. Pardon me. And we'll go back and do the skull in more detail here towards the end. Sorry, there's going to be some pauses in here. I've got some asthma today, and it's kind of really irritating my lungs, so we'll see what we can do here. The next thing we're going to put in is we're going to come down here just kind of below that into this bottom half of a third that we were working with, and we're going to put in the sacrum. And you can make these as detailed or as simplified as you want. I'm just going to do kind of a simplified sacrum here. Pardon me. And then we're going to get the spinal column in. And the spinal column from the skull, where it exits the skull, down to the sacrum. I'm going to turn the smoothing up to get a nice smooth line. Down to about this to the sacrum. It gets wider as it gets down towards the bottom. Not quite that wide though. It gets wider as it gets down towards the bottom. And the reason for this is because the spine at the base is holding a significantly higher amount of weight than the spine is. Up here it only has to hold your skull. Down here it has to hold your a lot of your internal organs and your ribs. Oh, guys, I apologize. Let's see if I can actually make this today. Let's see. The next thing we're going to put in, let's get the rib cage in here. And we're going to start up here with what we would call rib 1, so the first rib. And we're going to come down about yay far. Come a little higher. And we're going to put the rib cage in. And I think I'm going to make that just a little bit bigger actually. And sometimes you got to play around with it until you get something you like. We'll call that pretty good. This center that we marked, right about the center here, let me get my swatches up. Right around here is going to be a cartilage called the pubic symphysis. The pubic symphysis is where the two halves of the pelvis come together, where they meet. Pardon me. And so here's the pelvis going to be coming out. You know, those times when you just think about something way too much and suddenly you can't draw it. Yeah, having one of those moments. Don't overthink it. So there's going to be about our pelvis, and it's a hollowed out structure, so this area back here is going to be open. The sacrum's going to have some holes in it, and these are going to be, this is the bones, this is the ischium, the butt muscles, the muscles, the butt bones that when you sit down, the bones that you can feel against the chair, and the ones that get sore when you're sitting in a really long, boring lecture. Which is why we try not to have those. And the size of the pelvis, it kind of depends on if you're drawing a male or a female character. The pelvis in a woman is a bit wider than the pelvis in a male figure. And a male figure is going to have a narrower pelvis, shaped a little more like this. A female figure is going to have a little bit wider pelvis, just to kind of facilitate childbirth. So I'm going to draw kind of a mid-range. We're just going to kind of fudge it in the center there for this particular pelvis. Goodness. And we'll come back up to the ribs in a few. I'm going to put another layer on here in case I get irritated and want to delete these limbs again. Whoopsie. Okay, so we're going to put the big bone at the top of the leg, which is the femur. And the femur attaches into the hip with what's called a ball and socket joint, which is why you have such a good rotation. And the bone of the femur, we're going to take it down approximately about halfway, and it kind of tapers in towards the center. You get your knees underneath you. And it, of course, gets wider at the base. Just erase that back a little bit so you can see it, but it would be behind there. This brush set that I'm using is the one that I use for almost all of my illustration work, and I'm happy to share it with you if you would like. I just have a file called Mandy's Favorite Brushes, and I'm happy to share it with my students. So if you would like a copy of it, just email me and I'll let you have it. Alright, the bottom leg is going to have two bones in it. It's got a tibia and a fibula. And the tibia is a much larger bone. And one easy way to remember it is that you have the terrible tibia, which is a big bone, and then you have beside it, you have the fragile fibula. And that's just how one of my first anatomy instructors taught me how to remember it. And you know, fragile in that it's smaller than the tibia, and when you get a broken leg, it's more likely that that's going to be the bone that you're going to break. So we will call it the fragile fibula. Oops, I need my regular eraser. There it is. And you'll feel actually on the tibia there's a ridge right here where muscles attach. And if you reach down and feel that, you'll feel that ridge right on the front. That's the one like when you slip a pedal on your bike and a pedal flies back and smacks you in the shin, or you hit it into a table or something. That's the one that hurts really bad. One other thing that we need to get in here is what's called the patella, which is another name for the kneecap. And the patella has its own specific shape. It's actually called it's a sesamoid bone is what the shape is called. And you can actually, if you understand the patella, you can actually look at a patella, just the kneecap, and you can tell if it comes from the right or left side of a body. And it's kind of interesting that you can actually do that. Then the foot comes down and sits on this big heel bone called the calcaneus. And we'll go back and label some of these here in a few minutes. So this is going to be the calcaneus, and it looks different from the side view, but this is what that bone looks like. And then you're of course going to have the rest of the bones in your feet coming off this way. So this one back here, this is the calcaneus. Let's actually, I'm pretty happy with those. So let me merge these two layers together and put a new layer on, and let's do a little bit of labeling. So some of the obvious ones we have. Oops, I guess we don't need to parallel symmetry off right now, I mean. Okay, so we have, turn the smoothing down so I can write. We have the skull, and we'll look at the skull in much more detail. We have the spinal column. We have the ribs, we'll look at those closer. Rib cage. We have let's see, I'm trying to see which one. Let's do the sacrum. We have the sacrum, which is right here. And we have the pelvis. Are you going to be that way? Alright, we'll put it on top. No, we won't. It irritates me when the leader lines don't go out straight. It's just a pet peeve. Pelvis. These are the leader lines. They lead you to the word. This is the femur. Kneecap. Large bone. Tibia. Small bone, fibula. And the heel is the calcaneus. Alright, so let's call this labels, try to keep it out of trouble. And let's keep adding to this. I'm going to put another layer on here. And we're going to go up here and we're going to put in what's called the shoulder girdle. There we are. And the shoulder girdle is made up of the clavicle and the scapula. So the scapula is the technical term for the shoulder blade. Most people know it as the shoulder blade. Oops, see, we need symmetry. At last use symmetry. There we go. And we kind of just stylize these, obviously. And it's got this fossa, this pocket in there where the head of the humerus goes, and it's got this little wing on it called the acromion process. All right, so that is the shoulder blades. And I'm trying to decide if we want to make them. No, I think that's pretty good. And the clavicle is the collarbone. It goes across here. Well, let's just go ahead and put it in. So this is the clavicle. I'll zoom in on that a little bit. Sometimes it's easier to draw a line and then erase the middle than it is to get a nice super thin line. So this is the clavicle, otherwise known as the collarbone, and it attaches, that went a little far, we'll put it here. It attaches right here on the sternum, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. And it also attaches out here at the acromion process. And so we're back. So here's the head of the humerus, and again, it's also a ball and socket joint. And that humerus bone, we're going to bring it down to just about the bottom of the rib cage. We may have to adjust it slightly. We'll see. Sometimes when I do these little drawings, I have to fiddle with the length and the width a bit. Okay. And the lower arm we're going to bring down to kind of just around the hip area. And the lower arm is made up of a couple bones called the radius and the ulna. And the first one we're going to put in is the ulna. And the ulna starts wide and tapers down as it goes. So it starts kind of wide up here and tapers down. And the radius does the opposite. It starts small and gets wider as it goes down. And what ends up happening is that you have about the same width at the top and the bottom, only just the way the bones go. And the radius and the ulna have an interesting relationship, and we'll pull that out here in a little bit and look at that a little more closely. And it's held in here to this by a band of connective tissue. Pardon me. Okay, then the next thing we're going to have is we get down here to the hands. We have some small bones in the wrist called the carpal bones, and then we get into the hands. And these longer, well, that's a little too long. It's always playing with it. These longer bones in the hand are the metacarpals. You have 4, 1 for each finger. And then you have the fingers, or the phalanges. And on the phalanges, we have the same kind of division. And the phalanges are divided into the proximal set, the medial set, and the distal set. And if you remember, proximal is closest to the point of origin. And then where the thumb comes off on the thumb, sorry, it comes off closer to here. The thumb has 2 bones, the proximal and the distal. That is maybe not the best thumb I've ever drawn. We'll go with it though. And if we turn our labels back on for a bit, let's see, we can go back and we can add, let's see, the scapula Sorry. Let's try that again. There we go. Scapula. The humerus. I'm gonna have to do it. I hate doing them at an angle. Clavicle. Ulna. Get back there. Radius. IUS. Radius ulna. In the wrist we have the carpal bones, and there's eight of those bones. And in the hand we have the back of the hand, we have the metacarpals. And in the fingers we have the phalanges. And we have a proximal, medial, and the distal. I forgot to turn the symmetry off, so we got them on both sides. We'll just go and erase the second set real quick. I did that yesterday too. We won't, we'll leave them. Okay. Always some kind of mistake, I tell you. Something's always going on. Did not want that. Darn it. Let's see how far back our history goes. Not far enough. Alright, we'll just have to leave it. It's an anatomy class, for crying out loud. It's fine. And the whole set, huh? Until it's really irritating me. Alright, make sure you're on the right layer next time. Alright, we're going to come back and we're going to look at the rib cage. That's what we're going to do next. And let's see, eraser, soft 50%. I'm going to get the scapula knocked back just a little bit. That's a little too much. Alright, a little less than that. Last use symmetry. Get that back, knocked back just a little, because that's obviously going to be behind the rib cage. Oh, sorry, I had to pause there for a second and cough my brains out. Alright, let's get back to the rib cage. So up here at the top, we have, we're going to have rib 1. Actually, I'm going to bring it down here just a little bit. Get rid of that. A little darker color here. Okay, rib 1, and it's going to come in just below the clavicle and attach to the spinal column. Alright, right here is also something called the manubrium. So we have to put the sternum in, and the top of the sternum is that big center bone, like if you thump right in the middle of your chest, that's your sternum. And you have this bone right here called the manubrium, and it's got this divot, and if you push down on it, you can kind of feel where that that divot is on the manubrium. From there, the sternum, it kind of gets a little wider and comes down the length of the rib cage where it tapers in. And there's another little bone coming off of that called the xiphoid process. And if you push up right where your ribs meet in your abdomen, you can feel the xiphoid process sticking out. Okay, so we've got to get 10 ribs in here. It's 12, obviously, 12 on each side, but in the main rib cage, we're going to be looking at 10 ribs. And so I'm going to come about halfway, and I'm going to put in number 5. I'm just going to get these in kind of light, I think. Then we'll go back and draw over them in case I want to change them. See, I already want to change them. Okay, so I'm going to have 5 coming off here, 4, 3, 2 kind of comes right off of where the manubrium and the sternum meet, so that's 5. And I'm gonna space these out a little bit more. I'll get it. 1, 2, brush, 2. So we need 2 more in here. 3, 4. Should evenly space these. I just don't want the drawing to look crazy, right? I mean, that's just me. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and number 6. 6 is what I was worried about because 6 is going to be kind of an important thing for us. So we'll get 6 in here. Alright, so number 5. And these kind of drop down and then they're going to come around. We'll draw back over these. And this one drops down a little less. And this one drops down a little less. And they should be fairly evenly spaced. And this one drops down a little less. Right, if we go a little bit darker now, these will come around like this. And you can see it around the back. And it kind of dimples in where it attaches to the sternal body. And these circle around and connect to the spinal column. This drops down a little bit more. All right. And number 6 drops down more. Yeah, we got a little square on me. And I kind of don't want that square. And then each of these has a cartilage area that connects it. Actually, they get progressively wider as they go down. It has a little cartilage area that connects it to the sternum. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We want number 7. 7 connects up here to the sternum as well. And the cartilage kind of a little bit merges with number 6. So you have this kind of look. Alright, and if we go to our labels, I'll try to get on the labels this time. Room for that. Let's zoom out. We can do it this way. We have here ribs. Ribs 1 through 7. Oops. Everything I do right now is just not going where I want it to. Symmetry off. Alright, so ribs 1 through 7, alright, are called true ribs because they make direct contact with the sternum. And then we have ribs 8 through 10, which we're going to draw next, are called false ribs. They're actually called vertebrochondral ribs. B-R-O, let's see, C-H, vertebrochondral ribs, because they do not connect directly to the sternum. They connect to cartilage and to the vertebrae. So from the back to the front, they connect in the cartilage. So if we zoom back in on these, we need to get 3 more ribs in here. Okay. And those ribs, so 8, 9, and 10. Clean that up a little bit. It's made a bit of a mess. Couldn't make up my mind. Alright, 8, 9, and 10. And the cartilage kind of starts out here, and this cartilage fuses directly with the cartilage of ribs 7. So it doesn't actually connect directly to the sternum. It connects to this cartilage. What the heck? Where am I at? There it is. I'm drawing on about 15 layers now. I got myself all mixed up. Alright. So that gives us 10 ribs, but we need 12. So if we let me turn the symmetry off, we have ribs 11 through 12 are called floating ribs. And they're called floating ribs because they only make contact with the spinal column. And let's see, these connect up in here. You'll see the upper ribs here, and then here is rib 11, and it's going to circle around and come down here. So that's rib 11, and then here is rib 12. And rib 12 doesn't actually circle around, it just kind of flies straight off, kind of comes straight out. Ah, geez, symmetry on. Let's do it again. Just trace these real quick. All right, and there's our 12th rib. Cool. All right, we'll keep that for a while. Okay, and now that we have the skeleton kind of roughed in, I'm going to go in here and show you. The skeleton is actually divided into 2 kind of areas, and I didn't talk about this in class. I kind of forgot it. We have the axial and we have the appendicular. All right. The axial skeleton, if you think about like an axis, let's pick a color here. Oh, for crying out loud, pick a color. Pink's always good. The axial skeleton is going to be all of this in the center. So the spine, the ribs, the spinal column, and the sacrum. So everything kind of in the center, an axis that things can, kind of rotates around the body. The appendicular then, of course, is going to be everything else. So the pelvic girdle, the shoulder girdle, the hands, the arms, even the pelvis, part of the pelvic girdle, and the legs, feet, all this is the appendicular skeleton. So we'll make the appendicular blue and the axial we did in the pink. And if I'll drop this down behind the others, there the color gets pushed back quite a bit. It's kind of easier to see. So the axial and the appendicular skeleton. Okay. And you know, I'm always forgetting something here and there. I just checked my notes and I had forgotten something. We did talk about it in class the other day. Where'd my pink go? Get some of that out of there. There we go. There's a bone in here called the hyoid bone, and I pointed out in class that you can feel it up in your throat. Whoopsie, here we go. It's a bone. It kind of floats in here, and it doesn't really float in here, but it goes back. And the way this bone is supported is with the it's supported mostly with the muscles. Let me throw another layer on here real quick. The muscles that in your jaw and that come down here in your throat suspend this bone in its place. So that's called the hyoid bone. And I'm going to have to do and if you pinch in on your throat, kind of, not too hard, you'll feel some little bumps, and that's the hyoid bone. And that actually is, just a trivia thing here, that bone is actually, if somebody's strangled, that bone usually gets crushed, and that is a way that a cause of death can be identified. And I think I mentioned yesterday too that with the pelvis, the width of the pelvis is another way that a skeleton can be identified as to being male or female. So, in crime scenes, that's something that they use. But again, the hyoid bone, if it's crushed, it usually means somebody was strangled. So, not cool, but cool, right? Okay, I actually paused that for a second and got rid of some of those pink labels that were written backwards because I'd used the symmetry tool, so I got rid of some of those. They were kind of irritating me. What else do we have in here? Oh, those are the muscles. We don't need that. Let's get rid of that. And I'm going to unlock that. I'm going to take all these layers. Which way do I want to go? I'm going to move them over here. Do I want to move them over here? Yeah, I want the axial appendicular to still be there. So I'm going to move them over here. Alright, so we'll get that dude over there. Alright, let's see if we turn the labels off. We get some of them off. Not all of them. Yeah, we'll just have to leave them up. Okay, so let's lock those so I don't draw on top of them again. And we're just going to keep going. And I'm going to extend these lines out. There's the skull, shoulders, bottom of the ribs, pelvis, bottom of the pelvis, knee, foot. Okay, get rid of that. Pardon me. Where did axial and appendicular get to? Unlock that for a second. Where can we put this? Let's put this down here. Get that out of my way. That'll work. Alright, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a side view of this. Unlock that again, and get back up here. So a side view. And when we get to the side view, we'll talk a little bit more about the spinal column. The spinal column is a really interesting shape. You have various areas of the spinal column, and if you draw it with a brush, it works better than the marquee tool, obviously. You have an area on your neck called the cervical vertebrae, and if this is going to be the anterior side, so the person's going to be facing that way, it kind of bends towards the front. And then in the rib cage area called your thoracic vertebrae, it kind of bends this direction. And then there's our hips. Let me get the sacrum drawn in there. And then the lumbar, you've heard of lumbar support, like on your lower back. The lumbar region bends again. And I'm going to actually drop a straight line down here as well, if I can. Oops, I kind of missed. Try again. Here. Okay, so the cervical vertebrae is going to be kind of on that center line. The thoracic, that's maybe too much of a bend for the thoracic. Maybe not. Let's make it a little bit shallower. And then the forward bend for the lumbar region. And then the sacrum does something kind of wild. It kind of really comes way off the back. It kind of comes out this direction. And then again, you know, it starts narrower, and as we come down, it gets wider, and to give more support. And then at the sacrum it tapers back down. And then there's some bones right here at the end I don't think we talked about called the coccyx, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So that's kind of the spine. It's a little, maybe a little thick, maybe not. That's kind of the spine from the side view. And you'll notice it's kind of interesting. I think it's kind of interesting. It makes this kind of spring almost. That supports the weight of your body. And as you walk, you know, it kind of can spring up and down a little bit. Alright, I'm going to fuss with this till I'm happy with it, apparently. Call it good, Mandy. Walk away. Alright. So let's go ahead and we'll put the skull in. Same idea. And I'm going to drop the front of the skull down. And again, we'll come back and look at the skull in greater detail. Bumps and bits and stuff. Call that good for now. And the cervical vertebrae go right up into the skull through this hole. There's a hole in there called the foramen magnum, which means large hole. It really does. Look it up. It means large hole. And the spinal cord comes out and attaches to the brain stem and goes up to the brain. So anyhow. But the side view, if we get the rib cage put in here, we've got, again, rib 1 that we're looking at. And the rib cage is going to give us this sort of shape from the side. And then we have the shoulder blade, which I think people kind of imagine going straight up and down, but it actually kind of follows. It's kind of a wing shape, and it follows, and it kind of comes, it wraps around a little bit. Let me get some of this extra line out of here. And you'll see it's a little short. Oh, come on. There we go. That'll do. You have the shoulder blade. And I want my half eraser. We're going to kind of knock the spine back from behind the... You wouldn't really see it through the ribs. And the the pelvis. And where did my top of my pelvis go? It's about right here. Okay. Pelvis is kind of a crazy shape. Let's see. Just a nice way to rough it in. If you get an oval one direction and an oval kind of the other direction at an angle, you can kind of rough this in. Think about where the pubic symphysis is. It protrudes a little bit. And it's something kind of like that. Let me get rid of some of this eraser. There it is. Get rid of some of this. And it'll look a little more clear what we're looking at here. There we go. And again, this would be knocked back. And right here on the center line is where the head of the femur is going to lie. And that femur from the side is going to kind of come forward slightly. It doesn't come straight down. It's going to be kind of an angle. And the tibia and fibula are going to come, where are we at? Fairly straight down. Maybe just a little bit forward. And there's your kneecap. Get the same height. Come on, wrong eraser. Boop, try again. Getting tired, it's time for dinner. Let's see, close enough. And then here on the side, because we're a lateral view, we're on the outside looking towards the person, which is not a cross section. You're going to see the fibula on the outside. Okay, had to take a short little break there. Okay, and then the large bone that we talked about earlier that the body sits on, the calcaneus, is this large bone in your foot. And and then you have, hey, we didn't actually name them. And the foot, you have the tarsals instead of the carpals, and then you have the metatarsals, and then you have the phalanges. So carpal, calcaneus, I'm sorry, calcaneus. Well, we already have that written. Calcaneus, right there. And then you have the metacarpals, I'm sorry, the carpals, gee whiz, tarsals, I'm about done today. The metatarsals and the phalanges. Phalanges. And again, proximal, middle, and distal, except for the toe, which is just going to be proximal and distal. And I'm going to call that not too horrible skeletal drawing. That'll do for now. Okay. And is that all in one spot? That is all in one spot. Excellent. Guy over. Oop, come on, you. I may have to make the page just a little bit bigger. I was trying to avoid that. No reason, just was trying to. And we're going to go back and we're going to look at the skull in greater detail. So I just copied and pasted that on. We'll do a transform. Oh, so the skull, where are we at? There's the skull. And let's just knock that back quite a bit and we'll draw right over top of it. So the skull, if you just want to, to rough this in, you can just kind of roughly put it on in a square. And then it's just kind of an oval. Unless we divide it. Let's divide that and that's not centered. Divide that in half and that about in half. Right? And then we're just going to go with the kind of an oval in there. And again, if you haven't tried the smoothing tool in Photoshop, make it your friend. It's lovely. Oopsie. And if I kind of come right off this center and I can drop down the drop the jaw down from there. And again, these are of course stylized. And this lower jawbone is called the mandible. And it's got this big process on here that a big temporalis muscle connects to. So when you chew, this muscle that connects like right here is what lifts your jaw so you can chew. Let's see. So it comes down here, and then also coming off of that area, you're going to have your cheekbone, which is called the zygomaticus. And you have this kind of low spot, not a super hard line like that. You'll see a line though, like a depression in the temporal region, and then the eye. And the skeleton has its own kind of unique shape to the eye. It almost kind of has this like sad puppy kind of eye shape, for lack of a better explanation. And there's our kind of our teeth in there. And I'm going to move the spine just a little bit. This over here should probably be kicked forward just a little bit more like this. And again, that opening, the foramen magnum, where the spinal column goes in. Coming right off of here, you have a bump called the mastoid process, and we'll label all these, where a big muscle that comes down here called the sternocleidomastoid we'll talk about when we get into the muscular system. And then here on the back of your head there's a bump right here called the external occipital protuberance, and that is where the trapezius muscle, the big muscle that goes through your back and shoulders, attaches up here. The muscle kind of attaches and comes down like this. Get a couple of these things out of here. So the skull itself, let me get I don't need to take the guidelines out. But the skull itself is going to be divided into some different regions. And this front section, if you use the right tool, this front section about right here we're going to divide this out. This is the frontal bone. And under it would be the frontal lobe of the brain. You've probably heard that term before. This area is the parietal bone, and underneath it is the parietal lobe. P-A-R-I-E-T-A-L. I'm pretty sure that's how you spell it, the parietal. And then this region back here is the occipital bone. Oh, oops, see, that's a little large. O-C-C-I-P-I-T-A-L, occipital, and the occipital lobe is under it. The occipital lobe is where vision is processed, which is why it's called the occipital lobe. This area, let me pick another color. I rarely use green just because I don't have it on my palette. Not too many things in anatomy are green, except for like the gallbladder sometimes, and the diseased things are green. So I don't use green a whole lot. I don't think I even have a green in my. This is my general anatomy palette that I use for most things. If you would like a copy of it, I will be happy to share it with you for your anatomy pleasure. This is going to be the temporal bone, covering the temporal lobe. And I'm trying to just so colors don't overlap too bad. This area right here is called the zygomaticus, like your cheekbone. I-C-U-S, zygomaticus. Let's see. This right here is the nasal bone. And if you think about the cartilage coming off the nasal bone, if you feel your nose up where it gets really stiff, that's where the bone is. The rest of this is cartilage that's flexible, which is why you can get hit in the nose and it hurts like hell, but it doesn't necessarily or actually usually break the nose. You have to break it way up here to have your nose broken, and you probably get black eyes from all the bleeding that would come from it. Usually you've just like bent the heck out of that cartilage, and it doesn't feel very good. So that's the nasal bone. Pick another color. Back to blue. This is the maxilla, the top jawbone. And the bottom one is the mandible. And then there's an area in here, I'd colored it in, it shouldn't have been colored in. There's an area in here that it's not really part of the temporal bone or the parietal or the frontal. It's that white area. Oh, it's kind of, whoopsie. Just kind of line it here with this pink. It's the edge of a bone that's deep within the skull. If I do a transverse cut through the skull and we look down into it, there's a big bone called the sphenoid, and it looks kind of like this. I always think it looks kind of like the Batman symbol, a little bit like this. It's called the sphenoid, S-P-H-E-N-O-I-D, and this pink line that we're seeing is this right here. It's called the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. And there's a lesser wing of the sphenoid bone, obviously. Or maybe not so obviously. But what we're seeing is the greater wing of the sphenoid bone. Usually that doesn't really get identified in kind of a general anatomy. You get the temporal, occipital, parietal, frontal, all these that we've named here pretty much. This right here is the mastoid process. And again, we'll look at that. This is the sternocleidomastoid muscle attaches here. It's that really cool looking muscle on your neck. It's this right here. You have a big muscle here called the platysma. And then the external, this bump right here, external, occipital protuberance. And again, that is the trapezius muscle. Attaches here and attaches other places too and comes down. And you can already see, if you can draw the platysma in, and you can draw the sternocleidomastoid in, and you can draw the trapezius in, and you can deal with the cartilage on the nose and get the orbicularis oris, which is the muscles that form the lips. And the orbicularis oculi that form the eye. If you can draw the underlying anatomy, you can draw a figure. And the more you know about the underlying anatomy, the better you're going to be at figure drawing, actually. So I think we'll call that that, or just about an hour, which I think is about what it took us yesterday as well. So there's the recording that I should have made yesterday that I didn't make, that is now made. So I will clean some of this up and get these skeletons, the front and side view, up for you. If you want to draw your own, that's great. If you want to copy these or just download them, so when we get to the skeletal system, we'll add muscles on top.